Hello and welcome back to the channel. It's been a little while. I feel like I haven't had too much to talk about, but new sets here. Hunted released this past weekend, and I took Marionette to the calling, and I finished ninth. Just honestly so close. The breakers just didn't fall my way, and the deck is awesome, and I'm excited to start talking about it. So here we go. I'll just use this video to talk about the card choices, how I think about the hero, and where I think I'm a little different than some of the other builds. And we'll just kind of work through the methodology, like how I got here. I should say I did have a very, very helpful cohort working through the strategy for the deck and what cards felt good and bad and couldn't have been done without them. So big shout out to all of my friends who helped me out. Right. I will just start with the equipment. I think it's pretty obvious which ones you want. The hero is basically designed around this first line of text, the marking and stealth cards getting +1 and when this hits go again. So the list that I prefer to play really leans into the stealth mechanic. I think having this stealth keyword in your hand as often as you can is really important to kind of extract the maximum out of the hero power. And then I think the agents of chaos, so the second part of Marionette, there's something you should play toward because there's very high upside on a number of them. And so what it means is if you're enabling a stealth game plan and you're taking tempo because your stealth cards have on hits that the opponent cares about, then you can end up in a situation where flipping from Marionette to one of the agents of chaos actually keeps you in the lead because you're all in on this stealth strategy. So most of the hands you draw after you flip can utilize any of the agents. So anyway, that's sort of the game plan. I started talking about that because I was saying how Flick Knives is the obvious choice. And the reason is we want to be marking a lot and having the stealth synergies go with it. That being said, if you look at the main deck, you will see no copies of the retrieve mechanic. So I actually started out building Marionette with a lot of retrieve, and I just kind of found the hand states, they didn't play out as smoothly as I wanted. Like if you see an up sticks and run, this is the non-attack action that buffs for 4. Probably it's in the maybe board. Oh, oops. There we go. Should be, yeah, here we are. So if you see an up sticks and run, you don't want to block 2 with it, which means you want to cast it, which means you need to have a dagger attack. So I most often found myself waiting for the right hands with this. And in Assassin, you tend to want your arsenal as the most flexible card possible because card combinations work together. You have Codex of Frailty. So this card just ended up being kind of clunky, and cards that imply you must attack with the dagger work the whole deck. So you'll see other versions that play up 6 and run have lots of blues to try to enable always attacking with the dagger whenever you see this. Now then, I do have to pick up the point in the sideboard. I'll talk about that when we get to it. And I'll talk about why, as I progress from the calling version to my latest version, there's actually 0 retrieve. So all of this was yet another digression. Flick Knives is very important because it allows for some on-demand marking, but we want to do it very precisely. It should be a high impact turn for your first Flick Knives, and flicking the second clave should pretty much only happen when the game state is close to being won. And the reason is, if you reduce your marking capability to only the cards left in your deck and not having any permanents that allow you to mark the opponent, you are at the mercy of drawing dead. Just hands that totally brick. Do they only deal damage from what they say on the cards, and you can't get any marking synergy and you can't flip. So Flick Knives is there as the deterrent for the opponent. They make poor blocking decisions early or give you a window to flick your first clave, and then you get a huge amount of tempo and value, usually. That's the intent. All right, and then Snapdragons is kind of the same. I actually view this as kind of the same thing as the Flick Knife deterrent. Snapdragons lets you have a large hand, present your stealth attack, and then the opponent might want to block more than the power of your stealth card. They could do this if you're an Agent of Chaos that has a relevant on-hit, or they can do it just because they want to protect their hand state, and they know if they give exactly, say, these 2 cards, maybe a piece of armor, then their hand state should be protected. So Snapdragons is kind of the deterrent for the opponent over blocking early chain links, and it also is a reaction for Bonds of Agony. Those are kind of the main uses for it. All right, so these 2 are the synergy pieces, Flick Knives and Snapdragons. I'll talk about Mask of Deceit briefly. I won't go too in depth on it because I still don't. I'm probably like 80 or 100 games in, which I realize is not a large number, but I really go for quality games over quantity. And so anyway, I don't know all of the ways to use this well yet. I think it will just come with experience. There are some choices you can make with Mask that look bad but end up being good, and vice versa. So I really recommend just playing with it and trying to identify the game states where it works. And I'll use the cards in the deck to highlight those. So Mask of Deceit, will come back to how useful you are in a bit. Okay. Now, Tunic is something that needs explaining, actually, which is strange. Other assassin archetypes pretty much only have Tunic as the best option. But with Hunted, we have a very interesting chess piece now available, which I think, yes, here it is in the maybe board, the Blood Spatter Vest. So if you're a Marionette deck that has some synergy designed around Blood Spatter Vest, this card is very strong. So something to this effect would be, let's say you have a lot of Go Again in your deck. Just, you're playing Pain in the Backside because that card's awesome. You're playing several copies of Pick Up the Point. This is the head job that lets you retrieve. Anyway, if you're able to kind of use this like Syndromite, where you open the chain with something that has Go Again, you flick a dagger, you gain a resource, and then play your retrieve card, I think you can get pretty good mileage out of Blood Spatter Vest, and it looks better than Tunic in those spots. There's also spots where if you're heavier on the blue count, you can make plays where you use your dagger and then gain a resource to either swing Command and Conquer or otherwise facilitate 2-cost plays, which my deck does not have access to. Okay, so that's kind of what Blood Spatter Vest does. And now I can talk about what does Tunic actually do, and why it's here over Blood Spattered. So you can see I have, in the main board anyway, only 15 resource cards. And almost everything in the deck costs 0. So your turn cycles, they operate on either 0 resources or 2, usually. 2 resources because the clave costs 2. to attack with. And marking is so good that even pitching a yellow to Clave is not a bad play in a lot of spots. Okay, so if the deck only operates on 0 resource or 2 resource hands, it turns out Tunic is really good. So let's say I'm executing my game plan, I'm swinging with my Clave when I can, maybe I find an early Flick Knife opportunity for it to get good synergies out, like a Mark of the Black Widow on hit, something like that. What is my Tunic doing? Well, if I have tempo, and then I draw an all red hand that also wants to swing a dagger, Tunic will upgrade one of my reds into a yellow. And that comes up surprisingly frequently. You can imagine a hand that includes Savor Bloodshed, but no resource card, and Tunic will let you convert that into a hand that is threatening and threatens to continue the tempo that you've gained. That's one use for the Tunic. The other one, of course, is it already has this reputation of being good in longer matchups, and I think that's also true here. Decks that want to defend our first dagger swing can get punished by Tunic if we have a blue, and then you can swing both daggers. That being said, I don't think the daggers are the only ways that you want to be using Tunic in a deck like this. I think you can afford to include some like Tunic sinks, if you will. Stains of the Redback sort of counts. Like, it does say 1 cost over here, but if they're marked, it costs 1 less to play, and we are heavy onto the marking synergies, so this usually costs 0. So I'll take a brief digression into the sideboard to talk about a Tunic sink. And once again, this is what I brought to the calling. I'm changing up what I think is a good Tunic sink in the latest version. Okay. So we have Pick Up the Point and Death Touch in the sideboard that have a resource cost. I'll talk about Pick Up the Point first. So when this deck was getting constructed, there's kind of like 2 philosophies of how to mark the opponent. Against aggro decks, the most efficient way is usually this card, Lair of the Spider. So you can imagine any Ninja or Aurora, sometimes Viscerai. You get a mark out of this card because most of their attacks have go again, and you block 3. And it being a trap is also relevant. I'll come back to that. So this is like about as efficient as flicking. Flicking is more efficient because it doesn't cost you any cards, but flicking does cost you this really important resource on the board. So anyway, Lair is like one of the most efficient ways to block any deck that leads its turn with go again, or has plenty of go again in the deck. So then the question is, what do you do when your opponents don't have that? And our thinking was Pick Up the Point kind of fills this role. You can now flick earlier against slower decks with the intention of retrieving it later. And this is a Tunic sink to kind of mesh with that longer game state that you expect to happen into a slower deck. So a good example would be like a Guardian, Enigma. Most 2-handed warriors kind of fit this as well because, they got their Dynamo and they want to play all the D-reacts and just kind of be a grindy hero. So that's kind of the intention behind Pick Up the Point. While I think Retrieve, the mechanic itself, actually doesn't synergize too well with the deck, it's a Tunic sink and sort of the counterpart to Lair of the Spider in terms of efficient marking opportunities in a matchup. All right. I'll just briefly talk about Death Touch because this is also a Tunic sink opportunity. Basically, the testing against Enigma led us to, I keep saying us, my friends and I who are working on the deck, led us to want more power, like higher number on the card. And Death Touch just kind of fit the exact description. The downside to not being able to play it from hand is still there, but because it's assassin type, you can discard it to any Agent of Chaos, which does happen more frequently against Enigma. You can imagine them being marked, and it's hard to get damage through because they want to protect the board state. So you're kind of going to be toggling between base form and an Agent of Chaos. So anyway, it's easier to discard Death Touch in general against Enigma. And it makes your codexes, like on average, just 3 power better than they would have been otherwise if you were to choose a red stealth card. There's some other niche Death Touch stuff going on, and actually I think my current opinion is this is close to a mainboard card, but I'll leave it alone for now and just wrap up the segment on Tunic. That's pretty much everything I can say about why it's there. And I should talk about some of the other card choices, or this would be a very long video. All right, so the core thing we have to do to justify what cards to play is say, how well do they synergize with the game plan as written on the hero text? So we're looking for cards that have stealth, that benefit from the +1 and the go again. That's pretty much it. So I'll talk about the attack actions first in order of the ones that I think are the strongest or synergize the best. Number 1 is Mark of the Black Widow. The reason is this one is like, I think it's obvious to most assassin players why this is the one that I would pick first, but I'll explain it anyway. You have the condition on the card is still significant. The opponent has to be marked, but then the on-hit effect has no condition to it at all. It's like they just lose a card from hand. They get to choose which one, which is not as impactful as if I got to choose the card from their hand. But it means this always trades up a card if you could mark the opponent efficiently. And even if you don't mark them super efficiently, meaning you pitch to attack with Clave, you're essentially refunding the card that you pitched into the Clave. So yeah, Mark the Black Widow, just all-star in the deck. And I think any Marionette deck that cares about red stealth should be on it. Kiss of Death, I think, is the next most obvious. The type of plays you want to do with Kiss of Death are usually large hands with the opportunity to use Flick Knives on Kiss of Death on a second chain link. So the most high impact example I can give is, let's say the opponent is marked to end the turn cycle. You might arsenal your Kiss of Death in this example. Because the opponent's marked, you're going to flip into a random Agent of Chaos, but they stay marked. So you can use your Mask of Deceit to turn into Arakni Black Widow. And once you're Black Widow, you have the discard effect to banish a card from hand to an attacking stealth. So you're going to combine that with Kiss of Death, plus go again from your Snapdragon Scalers. And then on the follow-up chain link, when you Flick Knives the Kiss of Death, they will banish another card from hand due to the Black Widow. That's just how the effects get applied. It's still considered a stealth card that's retaining that ability. Notably, this does not work if you apply the Black Widow effect to the Graphene Coesura, but it does work with Kiss of Death. So anyway, the large hand synergies that work with Kiss of Death are why I would say it's like the next most obvious red stealth. Okay, from here, I think the most powerful one is not as obvious. So in terms of power, we have Mark and Kiss. These are sort of, we're starting the baseline of what makes these red attack components of the deck that we want. Okay, so to round out sort of the core, I would say, these 9 red stealth is Mark the Prey. This is innocuous. On hit, mark the hero. Okay, is that really doing much? I think this card is one that, until you've played with it, you probably don't think it's good. Essentially, if the opponent is marked, this is 0 for 4 with go again, then blocks 3. So against any aggro type hero, this looks like a pain in the backside, essentially. But the upside that it has over pain in the backside is it actually attacks for 4 when they're marked because of the base form hero power. That's only part of the upside. There's also the case, because we're running so many red stealths, that when you have multiple in the same hand, let's say I have a Mark of the Black Widow and a Mark the Prey, or even a Kiss of Death and a Mark the Prey, I can go for my first chain link to be the most annoying on hit for the opponent in either of these, and then use a reaction on it, say a Razor's Edge. It'll have go again from Arakni Marionette. And finally, we end the turn with Mark the Prey. Mark the opponent who potentially already committed blocks on an earlier chain link, and then flip into an Agent of Chaos to continue the tempo on the following turn. So Mark the Prey is a glue card, but also just awesome value. I don't think I could ever play this variant of the deck without it. And then the stealth choices get a little less like auto includes to me. And I think from here on out, if you find personal preference otherwise, you can go with that, or meta calls otherwise, you can choose those. Red Infect is just barely not an auto include for me. 0 for 5 is awesome. And given my preference of ending games by damage, I do prefer Infect and I would never cut it. But here's where I could see, let's say your meta is dominated by Assassin and Ninja and any deck that has 0 cost cards in it, and you want to replace this with Infiltrate. I would say totally reasonable. Go ahead and do that. The next stealth is Art of Desire Body. This is one that I actually kind of view this in the same grouping as Infect. It's a card that pretty much, if you have a better meta for a different stealth card, you can put that one in this slot. The expected meta we had, and actually the expected meta that we planned for, and the type of stuff this deck wants to be fighting, are actually decks with plenty of reds anyway. So you're thinking Syndra, Viscerai, in testing Fang also kind of has a lot of reds usually. So any deck that has maybe like that 60-40 split of reds or even higher, Art of Desire Body was just the best EV. You also have Aurora in that list of ones. So it's just another thing for them to respect. Once again, this could be your Infiltrate if the only thing you're playing against is new, for instance, and it could be pretty good. Okay, and then there's one more stealth slot, which is split into two copies of one and one copy of another. So Mark of the Funnel Web. This is a strange card because Assassin is known for attacking the arsenal, and here I am only playing one copy of it. Basically, it's like the opponent wants to be arsenaling D-Reacts against Assassin. It gives them way more flexibility with how they're allowed to defend, and putting it in the arsenal also lets you dodge effects like this. So anyway, that's basically why it's only a one-of, is because the type of counterplay opponents want to go for anyway blow this out. And I don't like that. I don't like getting blown out. Okay. Now we have 2 Reaper's Call. For a long time, this was a blue instead of a red. The utility I found pretty nice as a blue. Like you're You either pitch it to the dagger, or if it's your second blue of the hand, you can discard it at the end of your turn to mark them and flip. But that discarding is kind of inefficient. So it's it's a glue card at best. Now, you need some glue to keep the deck from falling apart. But I was finding that in blue, sometimes this is like the only stealth card in your hand, and you have tempo. And you'd much rather be attacking for 3 instead of 1 in those cases. And the resource curve already works pretty well without this being a blue. So ultimately, I changed it to a red, and there were 2 games in my calling run where I had to cast this. I was very happy for the change. Okay, that's the stealth cards, at least in the main. I'll jump down to the side really quick. Against Enigma, I put in 3 pick to pieces, and I take out 3 Art of Desire body. So the ratios maintain the same, but pick to pieces is way more important. And the Art of Desire has a poor hit rate against the 36 blue deck or whatever Enigmas are these days. Okay, now I'll talk about, those are all red stealth. The blue stealth are also important. I kind of glazed them over in my head. But Bonds of Agony is basically a red, which is awesome. You get all 3 modes on this card. It pitches, it blocks, and it attacks for a bunch of damage, plus an on-hit. You're normally trying to line this up with an Agent of Chaos, 1 react in your hand, plus 1 react on the board. So that's either Snapdragons or Flick Knives. And I say usually you're doing that. It's hard to draw a hand that has 2 attack reacts that are unconditional and have the Bonds arsenaled and to be an Agent of Chaos that also has a reaction. So it just comes up less, but that's still a very good use case. There's also fun things you can do with Flick Knives and take up the mantle. You've got the Bonds in your graveyard. Flick Knives will count as 1 reaction. Take up the mantle on any stealth card, turn into Bonds, and then use your Agent of Chaos for the 3rd. So anyway, Bonds is basically a red. I think it's pretty self-explanatory why this is good. You just have to play toward it in certain spots. All right, and this for me, Under the Trapdoor, is the best card that nobody knows about from the set. Or maybe people do, but until you play with it, it's another one like Mark the Prey. Until you play with it, you don't understand how good it is. So this is a pitch and block card that is sometimes a D-react, but it never clunks you because it pitches and blocks. So some of the problems that assassins have had in the past, like you can think of an Uzuri, for instance, you want to be playing on smaller hand size as Uzuri, which means D-reacts are good because they have high value and play toward the small hand size. But if you ever draw the hand of 2 or 3 D-reacts, you just do nothing. So this card is just the solution to that. It says stealth on it, so you can target it with Take Up the Mantle if that comes around. And it allows for the same type of flexibility in your hands that you would get normally from D-reacts, but then extra because it's also a blue. So imagine you're playing against a deck with on-hits. Could be an Assassin Mirror, could be, what's an example? Maybe an Aurora, and you're trying to play around their Lightning Press, something like this. You're just basically allowed to hold this card back in your hand, wait for your opponent to do something, and if they don't, you're allowed to not block with it and use it to pitch to your dagger, which is, yeah, it's just so strong. Flexibility, like modal cards in Fab are very, very good. Take a look at E-Strike. It's been in lots of decks that are allowed to run generics because they don't have a hero power that says otherwise, like us. So yeah, modal cards are good, and this is one of those. Okay, that's all the stealth. Let me talk about the non-stealth choices because they do matter about as much. Essentially, let me use the stats to talk about this. So in the main 52, 24 cards with the stealth keyword. So these are the attack actions in red and blue. And then the attacker action type is 15, which is pretty much the minimum I would run in a deck that cares so heavily about stealth attacks and hitting your opponent with them. So those reactions are Stains, Take Up the Mantle, Shred, Razor's Edge, and Tarantula Toxin. At first, we had fewer than 15, and it just seemed like too much of the gameplay was about daggers and not enough was about stealth. We added in the Razor's Edge, and the deck became way smoother. I think actually I'd probably want even more reactions than this, maybe like 17, though I'm not totally sure where to take it. And I'll talk about that in the next segment, or the current version of the deck. So let me give an example. Why is Shred in the deck? What makes this good? It's sort of the same thing as Under the Trapdoor. This card blocks and pitches. We only need 2 resources usually on a turn if we want to pitch. So it just sort of does everything. The only downside is this has less synergy with bonds lines because the opponent has to block, but you can usually engineer a situation where the Shred is not a brick. There's also an awesome interaction with Pain in the Backside. This is almost a must block for most opponents. If they understand the value of marking in Marionette, they usually put 3 in front of this and you can shred it and you can just blow them out. There's no, like, either they have to give a D-react on the Pain in the Backside, in which case they can't D-react later, or you get your 0-4 mark on them. Just awesome. Awesome synergy. You can also shred the clave, of course. Right. So that's like, Shred is the quintessential type of glue card for this deck. The other ones are a little bit less like glue cards and more like power cards. So they're pretty fun to talk about. Take Up the Mantle, I already mentioned. This is Toolbox Extraordinaire. Sometimes it's Bonds of Agony. Sometimes it's Mark of the Black Widow. Sometimes it's Art of Desire Body. And you use the Go Again from Marionette, plus the draw, plus some other shenanigans if you have a large hand. Really awesome card. Very fun to play with. Stains of the Redback is, I want to say, a card unique to this archetype. I think if you're on a heavier blue deck with Retrieve, Stains looks kind of bad. This has so many premium targets at red that you're just going to have 0-for-3 Go Again a lot. And it will unbreak your hands that have lots of stealth cards in them. So I would say if you've got an extra card in your hand that has to go to Arsenal, maybe plan your turn to put this one there because it opens up a lot of lines. Notably, this also reads target attack with stealth. Does not have to be an attack action. So this can go on to Calycera, which is another way to unbreak this deck. So being low on Retrieve means not as much flicking. But the interesting part is that the Graphene Calycera is powerful on its own, and you don't have to flick it for it to be powerful. So Orbweaver Spinneret is sort of a natural include in this strategy. We have lots of red stealths if we want the +3, so sort of like nimblism effect on the stealth cards. So at its base, it's a nimblism blocks 3, which is pretty sweet. And if you've done the thing that I mentioned earlier, where you flick your first clave kind of early in the game to get a big advantage, then this gets upgraded into make one of the most annoying weapons in the game, in my opinion. So these are sort of 2 sides to the same coin, I would say. They both synergize with a very high red stealth count. And in a deck with a little bit less stealth, you might not want as much Orbweaver. My cat is joining me for the discussion. Maybe she's not on camera just yet. Let's see. There she goes. She doesn't love being picked up, though. This is Zelda. Okay. I'll talk about Tarantula Toxin briefly. This is kind of like Shred, but it's a little bit clunkier because it doesn't pitch for yellow. Its main combos with Kiss of Death or the Calycera token. And I wouldn't play less than 3 copies, but at the same time, it's really hard to use effectively. So if you don't have a hand that guarantees its value, feel free to block with it. And I could say something very similar about Savor Bloodshed. This is a power card, but it is more like a combo card, the way I view it, than a card that you must play when you see it. So what I mean is, let's imagine you could have you have a 4-card hand that includes a Savor Bloodshed, but it also includes a line where your opponent ends the turn marked. So let's say the last attack of your turn is Mark the Prey or Pain in the Backside somehow, one of these, or even discarding Reaper's Call. So whatever example you like, if the opponent ends the turn marked and you're allowed to arsenal the Savor Bloodshed, now there are hand states you can draw that convert 4 or 5 cards, plus your opponent's marked already for the Savor Bloodshed on hit. Plus, they ended the turn marked, so you're an Agent of Chaos, which means whatever the random draw is from this, you can convert it to discarding to hero power almost every time, right? There are some whiffs, but like 4 to 5 times out of 6, you're going to be able to convert the draw from Savor Bloodshed. So I view it sort of like a combo card, not a card you play out every time, which if you're a bit of a new aficionado over the past 8 or 10 months or however long it's been, you'll find the same thing with Just the Nick, right? It's a card that if you don't see it in the perfect spot, you kind of want to block with it because putting it in your arsenal can brick you for several turns. I think Savor Bloodshed is similar. You want to play toward the big explosive plays with it, but if you don't see that big explosive play in the next, like literally this turn or the next turn, usually you should be blocking with it, and that's totally fine. There are 3 copies in the deck, so you'll get a Savor turn at some point. Okay. I didn't talk about Codex of Frailty, but I don't need to. It's very good. Razor's Edge is a glue card. I wouldn't play it in the deck without as many red stealth, though. You want targets for this that deal damage. All right, that's the main deck. All 52 of these are played in just about every matchup. I think Under the Trapdoor goes sided down into Enigma. And the matchups are obviously all here. All right, so I'll just talk briefly about the sideboard and I'll get into the other, the latest version of the deck with the changes. So we have Spell Void 3 for Kano. Kano is an awesome matchup with these. It's really hard to lose Kano when you have all of this. So the equipment you maintain on the board after all the Spell Void is your Flick Knives and your 2 Clades. And that's enough go again for all of your plays until Kano comes up with some kind of plan that involves D-Reacts that block for 4 into us. They just get totally hosed. They're like our hero power, everything is attacking for 4 with on hits, and like all we have to do is hold a yellow or a blue back in our hand on after presenting lethal, and they can't kill us. So yeah, the Spell Void is very good. And I would not cut it because, okay, this is something I haven't mentioned yet, but it's really cool. Normally assassin decks, at least the ones I've built, they're more reactive. So the main board won't be 52. It'll be like 40 or 45. And then there's like, 30 cards in the sideboard, and certain ones come in certain matchups. But the advantage to a Marionette, I think all builds of Marionette, but especially this one, is I just want all of these cards in every matchup. So we get to sideboard sort of like an aggro deck with sideboard, because we have the core game plan, and it's really hard for opponents to interact with it profitably, so we can just do it all the time. So that opens up space for things like the Spell Void, where normally you wouldn't like need to respect Kano or want to in Assassin because it's so hard to fit all your slots, but here it's actually really easy. So that's sort of that digression. For a similar reason, there's space for 3 pick to pieces and 3 Codex of Bloodrot against Enigma. The Codex of Bloodrot is just awesome. It means they have to hold an extra card back to do their Mirror Guide pivot, unless they want it to die to Bloodrot, which they don't. Death Touch, I did briefly say it's like almost a main board card in my current evaluation, but at the time it was also just an Enigma card, again, enabled by all the sideboard room. There's also both gems. I can talk about these at some length, but the short story is Schism of Chaos is very close to reading when you pitch this draw card. It's, if you play properly, it's really easy to not have an arsenal and for your opponent to have an arsenal, and you just get a free card. So if this isn't performing for you, try to play toward it a little more just throughout turn cycles. It doesn't come in every matchup, but for the ones it does, which are namely the matchups where you have better arsenal targets than them, which is a lot because most of our deck is red, or, you know, a cosplay red like Bondswagon. Yeah, Schism is just awesome. Plague Hive, similar idea. You get to, like, the resource curve for the deck is 0 or 2. So Plague Hive just gets you a free token because you already want to have 2 resources in your pitch. Black Tech is in the deck for, it's here for some like on hit type heroes. So I think an Assassin Mirror, think an Aurora that attacks you with Snatch for 4. But actually that's where it ends. So I'll be on to the latest version shortly because I've talked through almost everything. Black Tech won't be in it, and I'll make a little thing about why. Okay, so finally, I think the only cards I haven't talked about are Inertia Trap and Shelter. Inertia Trap is just the best one. I know Frailty is kind of like floating around. Inertia Trap is simply better. The things that opponents want to do is end their turn with an Arsenal D-React, and this says no thank you. There are lots of heroes that create greater than base power scenarios. So you're thinking Ira, Zen, Enigma has it as well, which will, you know, attack with a Spectra, whatever, you know, some ward with plus power. Like all the assassins want to be buffing power. Like Inertia Trap is just awesome. And that's without even considering buying it back with Under the Trapdoor. I would play it even without Under the Trapdoor, I think. We really are trying to leverage tempo and control the game state. So that's what Inertia does. Okay, and Shelter is here. I have a 3 of because it's good into the dagger decks like us, like Syndra, and in some matchups you do want a 4-block. So just kind of put it in. I don't think it's necessary though. I'll just use this to go into the latest version, which you can find in the version history of the deck list. So I'll just go through which cards are in and out for now. This latest version will probably be different depending on when you look at it, but at least for the video, here we are. -1 Codex of Bloodrot. Essentially, I think we over-teched into Enigma. Not only was she not that represented in the meta, which had like a huge amount of Viscerai and plenty of other progressive or proactive aggro strategies. We just had a little too much for Enigma. I actually won my round 3 against an Enigma that in that game, I didn't see a single red pick to pieces, and I still won at like 11 life. So just freeing up a little bit of space. -1 Shelter because I think I brought this in like, no joke, maybe only 2 matchups. And even in those, it felt kind of clunky. It's a generic, so you can't discard it to the Agents of Chaos. It doesn't have this trap synergy with Under the Trapdoor. So like if you if you see your shelter as the first D-reactivity came, but then you have a hand that you draw where it's like, well, I want to convert my Under the Trapdoor into a trap this turn. That's kind of annoying. So I've sort of shifted some of the sideboards to preference traps a little higher than shelter. And basically this is only coming in where either the 4-block matters or the like density of the D-reacts matters, which is pretty much just the mirror at this point. So yeah, that's why shelter -1. -2 Reaper's Call. Basically, I think the glue that this card was providing is just not pervasive enough. It's like if you're trying to glue a phone case onto a phone, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because most of the phone cases are designed to, you know, fit it snugly. So there were times where this was just totally irrelevant. Like you don't need the glue to put the case on the phone. In other words, the deck is built with enough marking that the Reaper's Call just kind of is there. I still love the card. I think modal cards are really strong, but I don't think it's totally necessary. And as the game plans evolve, as I get more reps, maybe this comes back in, or maybe another card, a similar effect to replace it. I'll actually talk about more of them shortly. Same deal with Pick Up the Point, actually. This is like sort of a glue card, but not really. You have to see it at the right time. Normally you want your Tunic to be up to pay for the retrieve. And the matchups where I was bringing it in, I was winning without even activating it. And in those matchups, like the 2-block is actually a liability. So it's just kind of another example of how the mindset's evolving. Same deal with black decks. I talked about snaps, like right at the start, where its main purpose is to be there as like, my opponent's not allowed to overblock when I have a bunch of cards in hand. They expect to have plenty of reactions, so the overblocking seems like it makes sense. But if I have Snapdragon still, I turn my snaps into a whole card or even multiple cards worth of value, depending on how egregious the overblock is. Which means the black deck in the list is like only for those mashups where blocking exactly with Battle Worn 1 gets you as much value as the snaps would have done in the scenario I just mentioned, which is like pretty slim. I do think for the mirror, you sort of get that, but at the same time, you can get totally, I mean, like imagine you're playing an assassin mirror and your hand state says like, I need to lead with my stealth card and I have 3 reactions behind it or whatever it is. The opponent can just like block 9 and play the codex. And then you're just sitting here like, oh my God, if I had Snapdragons, their block 9 doesn't work. And you just have to compare that trade-off to the Battle Worn 1. And I think most of the time I just want the snaps. So that's that. It might work its way back in. I still need reps on this, but that's sort of the idea. Okay, I'm going to start the additions with Public Bounty. This is essentially, this is Pick Up the Point, but less conditional. So you don't have to afflict first for the retrieve to work because there's no retrieve, right? It just marks them. It's a Tunic sync, okay? Fits the same slot, if you will, of being a Tunic sync. And it has the same stat line, +3 attack to your turn. So this will come in those slower matchups. Really solid against Enigma, right? Because if they're unmarked, but they have a board state, you mark them through the board state before you even start. So you turn on your hero power, yada, yada. Public Bounty, just pretty good in the longer games. I do have reps on this already, so you can take my word for it. It's pretty good. I don't know how many I would play. I might do a second one in this slot, actually, Command and Conquer. This is also experimental. The idea along with, I'll spoil a little, backstab and CNC, okay, is the type of thing this hero is weak to, especially my strategy, is when the opponent draws a perfect combination of D-reacts and pressure. So they'll deal something like block 3, maybe with a piece of armor, and then if I have my reaction, they're going to do their D-react on top of it. So having this text on the card that says they can't play their D-reacts just allows us to sometimes break them. So imagine you're playing against, I think the good example is like a Zen or a Syndra. You send your backstab or CNC, and all of a sudden their D-react rots in their hand, has to end up in our arsenal. Now, add on to this the synergies we already have of like, sometimes I'm using my inertia trap on their turn to get rid of their arsenal. Or sometimes my, well, I don't think I would be playing Plague Hive into Ninja, but you get the idea. So the backstab will end up main board, Command and Conquer sideboard-ish. Also sort of kind of a Tunic sync, cost 2, not 3, so it can be used with red in some situations. So that's sort of the reasoning there, is you just kind of want to be able to brick the opponent. And this is like, they're both counterplay to the opponent's counterplay. So we're just trying to get ahead of the things that are good against us. And notably, this card in the slot from Memphis was exactly Reaper's Call, which means in terms of on hit or like disruptive potential, you're not losing anything. They're both actually textless when they hit the opponent. It's only this additional line of no D-reacts that I think is going to be more important than the modality of Reapers. There is a way to give this on-hit text. If you're either Funnel Web or Black Widow, then this is actually really annoying for the opponent. They can't D-react it, and they know you have a reaction on the board that interacts with their hands or arsenal. So it's like pretty annoying. It hasn't come up for me yet because, once again, I'm kind of a quality of game over quantity of game tester, but I will be recording some games. Hopefully I can get an interaction with Backstab. Okay, the last card that's coming in is Persuasive Prognosis, which I think was, if you're an assassin gamer, this card is good. And you're probably like, what the heck, why wasn't it there to begin with? Essentially, the thing my deck was trying to avoid in Memphis is drawing too many blues. You have tempo and you draw too many blues, you lose sometimes up to a whole card worth of offensive pressure, and that's not fun. That's been an assassin problem for a while, and Marionette also has it. So the reason for not including them was to try to avoid this. That being said, I think the breakout performance of the Redline Cinder deck, along with the popularity of Viserai at the tournament, makes me want this card exactly. So I'll explain. Against Viserai, having extra blues is nice. The main way we lose those games against Viserai, by the way, I went 2 wins, 2 losses into Viserai at the tournament, and the second loss was what put me on the bubble. If I had won the second loss to Viserai, instead of losing, if I had won it, I would have been maybe like 5th seed instead of 9th, something like that. Anyway, so extra blues to be able to interact with the arcane more is really important. I don't think you can put in too many more than these extra 3. And in several matchups, these are sideboard cards, and I'll get to that. But yeah, so just having a little bit more interaction with the arcane will, it's a marginal change, but the amount of games you lose to the opponent just spiking you with 10 rune chance will go down, because on more of those turns, you'll have a few more blues. Okay, the other reason Persuasive is exactly the card, it's actually a tandem reason. So the intent is against those red line decks like a Syndra. Ironically, the mirror also sort of counts if they're on this version. If they're on a blue heavy version, then not so much, but whatever. So we'll just think about Syndra for now. this is a card you could draw on an Art of Desire body, or a Savor Bloodshed, or even a Ponder token that you're not unhappy to play. It only attacks for 1, but all of your reactions work on it. And if it does hit, it looks a lot like the value of red Mark of the Black Widow. So a little bit of a higher variance card in terms of confirming the on-hit and whether the on-hit truly does impact the opponent. But when it does, it's high upside. So you're getting quite a lot from a blue. And then the other sort of like the tandem effect of adding this in is I actually feel like the stealth count in the Memphis version is low. There's 24 cards. If you want, you can put in the red pick to pieces in some matchups, which, I think it's part of the sideboard plan for like fatigue games against new. You might want them, but Persuasive actually double dips in this. You can add more stealth cards up to 27, or even higher, once again, if you want those red picks in the deck. And while you're adding the stealth cards, your blue ratio or your resource curve goes with it. So you can play more than 60 cards, have the same stealth ratio that you would have before, and have the same pitch ratio. So this Persuasive is like, it's touching the Viscera matchup, the red line matchup, and any matchup you want to fat stack, which for 1 slot is a lot. I don't know if 3 is the right number, but I think for RTNs, until Viscera leaves, I would play these extra 3 blues and be happy about it. Okay, so, wow, that was actually way longer than I thought, just for whatever this is, 7 changes. But here we are. I'm a yapper. Okay, so it's only Snapdragons in the deck now. Once again, I'm pretty sure that the ability to ignore the opponent's overblock is going to be better than black techs, even in those matchups where they have some on-hits. So now we end up being a deck that strangely has very little armor, and very little defensive prowess because I cut the shelters. We really are, like, we're essentially making a bet with the opponent that all of my on-hits are better than yours. And if you can play toward that mentality, that's where you get the most out of Marionette. All right. I've talked for a while, but I haven't done any specific matchups yet. As always, I have all of them here. So, play your Talishar and just click the buttons. I update these as I notice things that need to change. For instance, this Dio is at 61 and it should not be. I will take out probably this Command and Conquer. Okay, so I do want to talk about a couple of the more prevalent ones that I expect for RTNs. Sort of like a side goal of this video is talk about 2025 season RTNs. If you're bringing this deck, what can you expect to fight and how do you want to approach it? So I'll talk about Viscera. So I mentioned we have the extra blues. This is a total of 10 blues and 10 yellows into the matchup. Playhive is there because it's pretty sweet to like pitch 2 to their arcane and give them an inertia trap or inertia token or blood rot. But inertia is the coolest one because they tend to like to set up their big hands. So that's why Playhive is there. The main deck 52 is what you would expect. And then if you're following along this list, you could make a copy of it right now, but I expect before the weekend, I'll get more reps with Command and Conquer and see if it's any good at all. This is sort of like having just a little bit more resource in the deck makes me think this could be okay. And that's why it's here. It's like it has that same backstab text, and the addition of a few more resource cards, maybe like the cost curve actually works with it instead of being a troll choice. So we'll see. Maybe Command and Conquer gets changed. If it does, I think you might expect it to turn into a card with a reaction type. I don't know which one yet, but I think the deck is lacking attack reactions just a little bit. So the game plan into Viscera, you'll see it's a similar game plan into other heroes, is you want to mark efficiently. So we have Lair of the Spider to do that. This doesn't always line up, but I think Viserai is kind of a favorite in the matchup anyway. So we want to lean into the cards that have really high upside, because if they do work, they push our win rate substantially higher than just your average card in the slot. So our game plan is to mark the Viserai efficiently, use the first Hunter's Clay flick to be really high impact. So I'm talking, you want to turn on your Mark of the Black Widow and get the on hit from it and have go again and play a Codex with your extra action point, something like that, right? That's really high impact first flick, and you're going to try to snag some tempo with it. Okay. I'll talk about the Arcane Barrier choice here. For some time, I thought it should be AB Shoes instead of Chest, and that will let you keep Tunic. But as I've already talked about, the denial of the opponent's blocking choice with snaps is really, really good. And Viserai has a stupid amount of blocking options. I don't know why Face Purgatory exists, but it does. So like, yeah, you just need to be able to ignore their stuff sometimes. And one of the pivot plays you can do is also a Bonds of Agony. You know, presenting this with 4 cards in hand, or, you know, 4 cards if hand plus arsenal. Your Snapdragons just tells the Viserai to lose their turn, usually. They can't just like lay down their whole hand and expect nothing to happen. If they do that, you snaps and you play your other stealth cards and deal 10 to them or whatever. So has to be snaps, in my opinion, over Tunic. But I did test the other one and yeah, came to this conclusion. I don't think there's too much else to talk about for Viserai. The main board is 52 cards, so I've already gone over a lot of it. I'll talk about Syndra because she won Memphis, so you might expect quite a bit of this at your event. This is one of the matchups where Black Tech would be in over Snapdragons if we care about the on-hit math. We care about the opponent's on-hit math. But my approach into Syndra is strategically to ignore her on-hit effects. So I'll use an analogy. Let's imagine you're playing against a two-handed character that's not Syndra. So like Ira or a two-handed warrior with Valiant Dynamo. These decks want to use either the Ira hero power or the Valiant Dynamo. They want to extract value over a really long game. And if you play into that style, their win rate goes up a lot. So against those decks, you want to be really fast. You kind of want to disrespect their Ira hero power, for instance. All right. I think the Redline Syndra is basically the same category. You look at their deck list and it reads like a just Oonga Boonga maximum aggro deck, but actually I think they're a Mask of Momentum farm deck. And the longer you let the game go, the more they will farm that on hit, and the lower your chances of winning will be. So what I want to do into Syndra is find the hand of mine that allows me to disrespect their Mask of Momentum draw because my stuff is better. So if the hive mind version of that deck really is like 55 reds or 50 reds and some yellows and blues, your turn might involve Art of Desire Body, because the card draw on this will like offset their Mask of Momentum. And then if you have any other effects on the turn that disrupt them, you're actually ahead. So I'm thinking like one of the Agents of Chaos, and we can lean on Lair of the Spider plus Under the Trapdoor to like ensure that they're marked, and maybe use our Mask of Deceit to get a good turn. And our big turn where we disrespect their Mask of Momentum might also include Codex of Frailty, because in the odd chance they did want to actually pitch 2 dagger on the following turn, you get awesome value out of your Frailty token. Furthermore, the Syndra decks, I think their best game plan into us is to include some D-reacts and try to like adequately time them in a value trade type of game. So once again, I think they should be trying to farm the mask over a longer game. And the D-reacts kind of help them do that, help them survive on hits, which is more reason for us to find 1 or 2 really big turns. Because 1 D-react won't save them from Kiss of Death for 10 plus on hit, Black Widow plus flick it on the next chain. Like they lose their whole turn almost no matter what to that. So the game plan actually looks kind of similar to the Viscerai, I would say, which is interesting. And it's a reason why Shelter has gone down to 2 copies instead of 3, is you actually don't want to be blocking with it too much. You don't want it to clunk up your large hand state that does the thing, which is counterintuitive, but hey, that's why we test. You figure these things out. Okay, what else? Yeah, Persuasive, good against the red line only deck, and it's one of the most effective blue cards you could have randomly draw with like an Art of Desire or a Savor Bloodshed on those turns. Okay. Talk about any exclusions. CNC is not in against Syndra because we're not trying to do 2-card trades. And I think the rest kind of makes sense to not be included. So if I were to modify this matchup at all, if you're thinking, does anything seem out of place? I think you could make an argument that the one of Inertia Trap could be a slightly more impactful card. Syndra doesn't often increase the power on their attacks. But this is an assassin typing. It's a trap for under the trapdoor. So really, I think the downside of having the 3rd trap is not too great. But if you did want to tweak a little, I think that's where you would do it. Okay. Let me talk about a different matchup. It was not very prevalent in Memphis, but I think Enigma is still very strong. So Enigma is one of the decks where backstab and command and conquer text is super relevant. They want to protect their board state almost at all cost. CNC also has this upside of being a popper against the 6 or 9 phantasm attacks that Enigma runs. So this is the Enigma matchup is one of the reasons for trying this card. And once again, if it proves to be less effective, I would probably put an attack reaction in the slot. Attack reactions are also good against Enigma because it lets you convert your hand states. And one of the ways you can lose that matchup is you draw 4 reds and attack for 7, and that's it. So that explains that part. Inertia Trap. So the type of play patterns Enigma wants are to be attacking with a ward that has buff power and then Arsenal D-React to protect it. Inertia Trap says no thanks. I think, if you look at the cards that are included, Inertia Trap might actually just be better than CNC, but until I get reps, I won't make that claim. So there are a lot of turn cycles where the Enigma just attacks with Phantasmaclasm and the Inertia Trap is just a block 3. Which I'm not trying to say that's downside for Inertia. I just mean, like, if you ran too many of them, you could conk yourself on turns where they're not enabling block 3 with it. So that's something you could tweak into Enigma if you wanted. The Public Bounty I explained a little bit in the version history. I think it's just an awesome role player into Enigma. Though you could also change the slot to something you find more effective. Schism and Plague Hive are both pretty awesome into Enigma as well. Plague Hive, all 3 modes are usually active. And if you ever Schism and Inner Chi into the Enigma's arsenal, they will have a fit. Because we could, if you get the read, if that's it, an Inner Chi in there, you can just avoid playing your 3 arsenal disruptors. Oh my God. I never talked about why it's 1 Leave No Witnesses. Basically, you play this deck with lots of stealth cards, and you notice that more copies of Lenient Witness doesn't feel good. It's clunky. And it's that simple. So there you have it. I think the video has been going on pretty long. If you want more insight into other matchups, I've played just about everything at least once. So you can shoot me a message or a comment. I'm going to wrap this one up. Be publishing gameplay as soon as I have the chance to record some. Probably just Teleshar against random opponents. But if I do anything internally that has maybe not too much talking from my friends, then I may also include this. Okay, thanks for joining, and I will see you in the next one.